Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to the 2024 Celebrating the Sacred Feminine, brought to you by the ISKCON Vaishnavi Ministry. This year is inspired by the official UN International Women's Day coming up on the 8th of March, and their theme this year is Invest in Women. Today we are joined by Cīti-Sakti Devi Dasi from London, UK, who I will introduce shortly. Welcome, Cīti-Sakti Mataji.
Thank you so much, Hare Krishna.
In Bhagavad Gita chapter 10, Krishna explains various ways that we can see him in the material world. In Bhagavad Gita chapter 10, text 34, Krishna specifically explains the 7 divine feminine qualities. For this campaign, celebrating the sacred feminine, we will be delving into these qualities, examining each of them so that we can develop and deepen our relationship with Krishna and his devotees. Today, with Cīti-Sakti Mataji, we will be addressing the quality of memory. I'd like to introduce Cīti-Sakti Mataji now for all our listeners. Her Grace Dr. Cīti-Sakti Devi Dasi has been practicing and sharing Krishna consciousness since the mid-1990s and is a disciple of His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami. She lives in London, UK, and serves as a preacher, mentor, and Sangha leader. She is a trustee and director at the Institute for Applied Spiritual Technology in Washington, D.C., and the co-founder of Mindspace, a mental health service for devotees in the UK. Professionally, she serves as a medical director, consultant psychiatrist, and broadcaster, and has been published several times in journals, magazines, and newspapers. She is well known for her spiritual commentary on mental health and current affairs, and presents Thought for the Day on BBC Radio 4 and World of Wisdom on BBC World Service. Her wisdom reaches a global audience in the hundreds of millions. Graduating from Imperial College as a medical doctor and then specializing in psychiatry, she brings together over 2 decades of experience in scientific advances in mental health with spiritual models of care. She is on the executive committee of the Royal College of Psychiatry, Psychiatrists, Spirituality and Psychiatry, SIG. Wow, thank you so much for the compassion and dedication through your many services, Cīti-Sakti Mataji. Thank you for taking out the time out of your busy schedule to share your wisdom with us today. And now I'd like to invite you to please chant the invocation prayers for us before we begin this session.
Thank you, Tulsi Sundari. Om Agyantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yata Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvetam Sarvadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padha Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakambhitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Pancha Kalpa Turubhischa Kripa Sindhubevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Thank you. So, thank you again, once again, Cīti-Sakti Mataji, for being here with us. And I'd just like to remind the devotees listening to please check out the rest of the campaign on the ISKCON Vaishnavi Ministry YouTube and social media pages. We will link that in the description for you to find. Following this series on the 7 feminine qualities. So I'd like to start off with the question in Bhagavad Gita 10:34. Krishna says, among women, I am fame, fortune, fine speech, memory, intelligence, steadfastness, and patience. And then in the purport, Srila Prabhupada writes, if after studying one can remember a subject matter, he is gifted with a good memory or smṛtir and the ability to not only read many books on different subject matters, but to understand them and apply them when necessary is intelligence, medhā, another opulence. So considering what Srila Prabhupada has said here, how do we understand this quality of memory? How do we unpack Srila Prabhupada's definition of memory here? If you could share some thoughts.
Thank you. That's a wonderful place to start. Actually, this verse itself, particularly the second half of the verse, and its relevance to our theme, for International Women's Day. Among women, I am fame, fortune, fine speech, memory, intelligence, steadfastness, and patience. Most people get very, interested in when Krishna says things like, women are less intelligent. And here he's saying actually intelligence he is intelligence amongst women. He is memory amongst women. He is fame, fortune, fine speech, steadfastness, and patience. So I think that in itself says a lot. What does Krishna mean by among women? And Prabhupada actually addresses this first. He actually says these 7 opulences are considered feminine. So he's not saying they only rest in a female birth. He's saying they're feminine. So actually cultivating them and using them, particularly in Krishna's service, is desirable for men, women, and everyone in between, So this term memory specifically is, if we look at it based on Prabhupada's example, which is actually very akin and similar to the English language understanding of it, what he's telling us is memory is really our ability to recall what we already know or what we've studied, what we've heard. Okay, so in the simplest terms, memory is our ability to recall. He actually elaborates elsewhere that intelligence, memory is a component of intelligence in one sense. He says intelligence is the ability to recall coupled with a sophisticated discernment or fine discrimination, right? So not only can one recall, so someone with a good memory can recall what they've experienced, what they've heard, what they've seen, but someone with good intelligence can then apply the discernment to see what to take, what not to take, how to put them together. So memory is something all of us rely on. But one thing is that we don't realize that there's often don't think about and don't realize that there's many different types of memory and aspects and layers to memory. So most of us, like if we take this definition or if you just spoke in colloquial language in general circumstances, when we talk about memory, we're really referring to neurological or physiological or working memory, right? We think about memory as a feature of the brain, right? It's a very physical thing. But physical memory, even memory in the body, like muscle memory, right? Most of us can relate to that. That's how we normally think of memory.
Yeah.
But this is a very physical type of memory, a physiological type of memory, a neurological type of memory. That's only one type of memory. And remember, Krishna his explanation and his understanding and his reference to things go beyond just the body. Okay, so as well as this kind of very physiological, neurological memory we're talking about, There's also metaphysical memory. Now, if we look at the mind, that memory that's accessible to us right now in the here and now is really operating on our like kind of 10% of the mind that's accessible to us. We also have our unconscious mind, our subconscious mind. So memory also has a metaphysical aspect, a subtle aspect. So when we can recall things, or things come up from our conscious and unconscious mind, that can come up maybe an emotional memory or a previous experience, may come up in our sleep, etc. That's another type of recollection, right? It's not bound by time in the same way, right? Often what we're thinking about, oh, what I remember right now is related to what I knew in this lifetime, right? Or even as far back as I can remember in this lifetime. Maybe there's many years of the childhood we can't remember, but the metaphysical memory goes beyond the time and space of this physical body. And then there's a third type of memory, spiritual memory. And Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness comes from me, right? And as one surrenders to me, I give them the knowledge of how to come to me. So he's referring to a completely different type of memory here. From me comes a type of memory and forgetfulness and recollection and knowledge that is really even outside the boundaries of your body and your subtle body. Okay. And that's where Krishna is saying, I orchestrate that. Of course, he orchestrates also the physiological and metaphysical, even though day to day those are done by the demigods. But Krishna also, the demigods serve Krishna. So ultimately, it comes from him. Everything comes from him. But in terms of the different categories. And then last but not least, we have our pure devotional memory. Who am I? Who is Krishna? And what is our relationship? Okay, so whilst this verse may appear at first glance to be referring to just a human and physiological quality of memory, memory itself has many aspects. And the more far removed our subtle body and gross body, our mind and our brain and our body are from spiritual activities or our self-realization, the weaker they become. Because if you look at how they've changed over time, we look at Satyug, Tretayug, Dwapayug, and Kali Yuga. The knowledge that reawakens our actual memory, which comes from a deeper place, that is less accessible to this working physiological memory the further along you go. You look at the first 3 ages, nothing was ever written down. It was spoken once, and the working memory, the metaphysical memory was so strong that could be heard and retained and acted upon, because the lifestyle and behaviors were more akin to our spiritual lifestyle and behavior. But in Kali Yuga, because there's so much disjointedness, especially when we don't take to spiritual life, generally the memory tends to be weak. Things have to be written down. And even when they are, one has to keep referring over and over and over again. Sometimes you can read the same thing 10 times and it feels like you've not read anything at all. So, when I was kind of looking at this verse and unpacking this idea of memory, it can be very helpful to understand that our memory isn't just reliant on our physiology, on our neurology, or even our subtle intuition or connections and memories, but that there are deeper aspects, the spiritual aspect and the pure devotional aspect, which are really something that are within us and are activated by a relationship with Krishna and Guru and the Vaishnavas.
Thank you for explaining that so eloquently and making those divisions and distinctions for us so that we can think about it more carefully beyond perhaps a superficial connection and connotation. And could you kindly clarify before we move on to the second question, what is the difference between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind?
And the unconscious mind. So the conscious mind is that which you can recall immediately, right? If I asked you, what did you have for breakfast this morning? You can tell me immediately, right? If I ask you, what you did 10 years ago on this day at this time, that's been buried deep into the subconscious. It's accessible, but might need some work. Maybe you need to sit with a therapist or a close friend, and maybe you need to dive into a significant event that was happening at the time. And that memory is often drawn out by emotions. Right? And can often be drawn out in dreams. And unconscious is often carrying things from very early childhood and previous lifetimes. So again, that needs even more specialist intervention, or you know, as these boundaries, they're kind of subtle boundaries between the conscious working mind and the subconscious and unconscious. If those get ruffled by either difficult situations or hypnosis, etc., then, or dream time, sleep time, then things can come to the surface.
Right, got it.
And then become accessible in the conscious mind. It's like if something comes from the deep ocean and comes right up to the surface of the ocean, right? But normally it lives deep in the ocean.
Got it. Yeah, things can surface. It's true. I feel especially traumas and triggers can come up like that, but yeah.
But so can inspiration. Often our inspiration is a previous talent or skill we maybe had before.
Yeah.
And we're inspired to act on it because the stars have aligned and it's Krishna's arrangement.
Would you say that's the same as a samskara, like a positive
Yes, absolutely.
impression?
Absolutely. Our unconscious and subconscious are a product of millions of impressions. And the milder the impression, the more it's filed away till later. But the more repeatedly we do it, you know, we do something, the impression becomes stronger and stronger and then comes to the surface.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, and I love the point about repetition. I think the philosopher Aristotle said, you know, excellence is not just a single act, it's what we do repeatedly. Because it's easy to do things once, but to do things repeatedly, consistently, continuously, especially the memory of Krishna, you know, can we keep that memory from moment to moment? Yeah, that's a really nice point. So moving on to the second question, just to give a little bit of context, there is a pastime in our bhakti devotional literatures of a South Indian Brahmana, and he is, you know, illiterate. His guru gives him an instruction to read the Bhagavad Gita, and he's thinking, you know, why is he asking me to do a seemingly impossible task? And then one day Lord Chaitanya himself comes and says, you know, he sees him and he's crying, and he says, oh, why are you crying? And he sees Krishna, or he describes this picture of Krishna on the Bhagavad Gita. You know, I'm sure many of our listeners know it well, that Krishna's on the chariot. You know, he's looking so beautiful, his black curly hair. And what is he doing? He is God, and he's driving the chariot of his servant Arjuna. And so this Brahmana is just brought to tears that, wow, God, you know, the Lord of all lords, the supreme person, is becoming subordinate and subservient to his devotee. That is the depth of his humility. And so Lord Chaitanya says to him, you know the Bhagavad Gita perfectly, even though when he was trying to read it, people would make a mockery and tease him, jeer at him, you know, scorn at him, sneer at him, saying, you know, what do you know? How are you trying to study this? You can't even read, you know. And so that brings up the point that devotional memory is more important to Krishna than, you know, this quality of technical scholarship memory, you know, which, you know, is not a bad thing, but if it's devoid of devotion, then it's something unfavorable. So my question to you is, like, do we need to remember scholarly Sanskrit slokas and stanzas of poetry to connect our memory to Krishna? You know, many women feel they're less than or not good enough in this area. Is that a problem in bhakti? Do you have any thoughts on why people struggle and others find it easy? And any tips for how we can learn verses, since it can be very favorable for our bhakti, you know, if we see it in that light. So if you could share some words and thoughts on that, please.
You've asked me 4 questions, so I'll take them one at a time, and I may have to get you to repeat the 4 questions. So with the first one, do we need to learn verses? Okay. And what's the benefit of them? We need all the help we can get. Okay. Now remember, these verses are Krishna's words, or they're about Krishna. Okay. So they're directly descending from the spiritual world. They're written down by and expressed by Krishna and his devotees. So they're of great value. They're not ordinary words. And, you know, although the mind and brain, they facilitate the human aspect of memory, these verses, being spiritual in nature, they transform the mind so that it resonates and vibrates at a frequency which is more similar to our true nature. Okay. And they facilitate making the mind our friend. Right? The sound vibration of Krishna's words, the sound vibration of his devotees speaking about him and describing him, that sound vibration literally transforms the mind, and it destroys the obstacles in the mind and makes the mind more soul-like, like a friend, like a bridge to the soul. You know, the mind has these two sides, right? It's outward facing to the transient ego and inward facing to the eternal ego. And those things we engage in, which are spiritual in nature, which are soul-like in nature, which are God-like in nature, they transform the mind and make that bridge much more inward-looking. We are walking that path. So, and also something else about sound vibration is that, you know, yes, people might go, okay, well, Sanskrit's not my language. It's not, might not be your human language. And for most people, it isn't. Very few people speak, converse, and write in Sanskrit. But Sanskrit is the language of the soul. And it's the oldest language. So because it's, and when we say oldest, it's beyond time. And the oldest languages resonate with the oldest part of us. So there is a transformation that takes place. Also, these verses, you know, whatever we were talking about impressions before, what we hear, what we speak, they leave impressions. So it's impacting not just what's going on in our mind right now, but it's also impacting our mind on a deeper level. So because we're filling now our subconscious and unconscious with also transcendental thought, feeling, and vibration. Remember, the mind is transformed by sound so quickly. We do it all the time. We use music to change our mental state, right? We use words to change our mental state. We could change the intonation. So learning verses is a powerful way to transform the mind into becoming a friend of the soul. It's important, but it's not necessary in the sense that, oh, as we can see from this pastime, it's not necessary as in if you can't, because you can't read, then Krishna isn't going to say, well, you can't read, so you can't come close to me. Krishna also knows our circumstances. Equally, for someone who can't read, they can learn by hearing and repetition. Do you see what I mean? So there's different ways. So it's really about, what does this mean for me? Why am I doing it? Am I doing it so I'm known to be a scholarly person who knows lots of verses? Or am I doing it because I want to engage my hearing, my speaking, and my thinking in not just in the English language or the Hindi language or whatever language is, or French, but actually I want to engage them in the language of my soul. And this is, I asked Sachinanda Maharaj a similar question, like, you know, most of my sharing, a lot of my sharing and preaching is with people where, you know, they may not be familiar with Sanskrit, etc. Is it important for me to share the verses or speak them? And he said, actually, learn them for yourself anyway, because the soul recognizes you know, the Sanskrit language. In fact, the analogy he gave was just like when you see lightning, you know thunder's coming. In the same way, when the heart hears Sanskrit, it knows Krishna's coming. So it was really beautiful. And then he gave some practical tips also. You know, it's nice for people to, even if you drop in a few words, they may not be familiar with them, but it gives them confidence and some inspiration that this person's, you know, also knows the language of the original texts or can reference them. So it was just really just, for me, it helped me look at, you know, learning verses not as a academic exercise, but as a devotional practice of transformation of the mind, connecting the mind with the soul, and really just this idea that, okay, actually my soul will recognize, just like when we see lightning, we know thunder's coming. So my heart will know that Krishna is coming. It's really, 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 so it is, yes, we should for ourselves learn verses, and different devotees are going to need to learn verses in the service of others to varying degrees. We shouldn't just have it, if I don't need it for my service, I don't have to do it. Does that make sense? There's a lot of things in our Siddhanta that we do actually primarily for our own devotional progress. Because the more we progress devotionally, we become of better service to others.
Yeah, and whatever we do, just by existing, it's, you know, that they say leaders get rewarded in public for what they practice in private.
Mm-hmm.
You are who you are when no one's looking and listening. And so, yeah, I absolutely agree with it. And I love the thunder and the lightning. Like
You're
if you
beautiful,
hear
right?
lightning. In fact, I have a very vivid example. I was doing my postgraduate certificate in education at UCL Institute of Education, and the modern foreign languages session that we had, the lady was a Spanish lady. She got us all to say something in another language, and I chose Sanskrit, and my table volunteered me. So when I said I was going to speak Sanskrit, she said, everyone, stand up, close the curtains, turn off the lights. This is the oldest language in the whole world. And I literally felt it was that lightning thunder thing you just said,
Yes.
because I was like Sanskrit, and suddenly all this stuff started happening in the room. And then I was like, Yad yada charati shrashtas tattadevetarojana sayat pramanam kurute lokas tad anuvartate. So this is Gita 3:21, where Krishna is talking about how association is important, because whatever a leader does, common people follow. And so we got the wisdom through the Sanskrit, and it wasn't about the scholarship. It was that people started to think, oh, well, who am I following then? Who am I paying attention to? Who am I letting into my life? Because apparently that's who I'm going to become. And that's, as a society, what's happening. Whatever we're seeing that the leaders are doing, people are following. So yeah, I love that example. Thank you.
So you had another question after that as part of this.
Yes. So yeah, many women feel that there's less than, that they may feel less than or not good enough in this area. Is it a problem in bhakti? I feel like you've answered that, but did you want to share anything else further on that?
About women thinking
Yeah, like it feeling not good enough if we don't know these shlokas. I feel like you've said if we're doing it in service and for our purification, then it's not an issue. Krishna's not going to see it as, you can't come to me because you don't know Sanskrit. So yeah, I feel like you've answered it, but did you want to add anything more further?
I mean, the thing is, not feeling good enough just because you're a woman, it's really a self-limiting belief. You're putting the imposition there that, Krishna said that anyone can come to him and he thinks of everyone. Okay. But I'm telling him I'm not good enough. So it's not a fact. It's not a fact at all. It's just a self-limiting belief. And sometimes I think, man or woman, whoever you are, it's really important to check our self-limiting beliefs, because they often are the opposite of what Shastra is saying. And we're often putting our shortcomings ahead of Krishna's truth and what Krishna is telling us. So we have to be mindful of that, because in one sense, it's another ego trip, but it's just the opposite way.
Yes, I know your spiritual master Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj often says there's two ways to play God. One is I'm great and one is I'm nothing, but then
Yes.
the focus is on you,
Yes.
whereas we want to bring the focus to Krishna. So that's wonderful. Thank you. So yeah, any thoughts on why some people find it easy and others don't, and how can we learn verses if it's favorable for our own progress, as you said, and then also sharing it as a service to others?
So practice. This is the thing. All of us, loads of abilities, especially if you're looking at the human physiological and mental side of memory. We're all born with different abilities. We have different IQs. We have different emotional intelligence. We have different interests. Okay. And different aspects of our sadhana are going to be easier and more difficult. Some people find regulation is just easy for them, and others find regulation difficult. Some people find japa so easy to just sit down and just chant. Others find that difficult. Some people can read for hours, others can't. Some people can memorize things, they actually enjoy memorizing verses. It's an enjoyable thing for them, whether it's in, whether it's devotional verses or anything, they just like memorizing them. So I would say, just if you find that you want to learn verses and the psychosocial nature you've been given in this lifetime doesn't lend itself to learning verses, practice, because the endeavor to practice will attract Krishna's mercy. Your endeavor in practicing, learning, and ultimately the desire, the why behind why you're learning and practicing, is what's going to attract Krishna's mercy. That's what's going to attract Guru's mercy. Just even going back to the South Indian Brahmin who was illiterate, it was his endeavor to fulfill his spiritual master's instruction that opened his heart to being able to understand what Krishna means through the Bhagavad Gita. So the whole purpose of all of Krishna's verses and everything he says is to get us to understand how much he loves us and how much more we will be happy, how much happier we will be if we re-engage with that relationship with him. So if that is our purpose for learning verses, even if our biopsychosocial nature is not lending itself to that, Krishna will see our endeavor and he will help. And, I think one thing you asked earlier was are there any tips on how we can make it easier to learn verses? These verses are sung, they're not spoken. Sanskrit is sung. And everything, as you just, when you were just speaking the Sanskrit from, your pastime that you were sharing, you weren't speaking it, you were singing, right? When we did the invocation mantras, the Mangalarchanam, it was sung. Sanskrit is sung. When the heart is full of joy, we sing. You look at kids running around singing, they're usually expressing joy. Even a person, when they're happy down the street, they'll be humming a tune, or you'll see them there, they'll bob their head up and down because there's some music in their mind or heart. So we are not designed to walk, we are designed to dance. So if you want to learn Sanskrit, sing it. Everything with a melody, it's just easier to learn.
Absolutely. I remember a lovely program you organized, and I learned the verse on the 9 process of devotional service because there were some children doing a drama there, and they were like, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam,
Atmanivedanam. Yeah, and we do the clap with it, right? Exactly.
Yeah, and it was like, if it was just like a dry meter, then I'd be like, okay, first Shravanam, then this, and then it's like the dance just brings you in. You're right. It's a beautiful way to learn, and they do say that in the spiritual world, every word is a song and every step is a dance. So
because we are full of joy.
Yeah. So thank you. Moving on to the third question. So aside from our own nature and personality, there's existence and integration with the world, the people around us. Krishna and spiritual teachers and practitioners, they teach and they serve according to Desha Kala Patra, time, place, circumstance, to serve like in that present moment dynamically. Can you share some guidance on applying our memory so that it aligns with the present moment dynamically? And when we're going about in this world, we can do our services attentively, effectively, and pleasingly for the service of Guru, Gauranga, and the people around us.
Your actual answers in your question use this word attentive. Now, going back to the word memory, and the function of memory is to recall. Okay, we can only recall something we've been exposed to, either through hearing or sight or taste, smell, touch. So when it comes to our spiritual life, it is based on these first 2 tenets of hearing and, Shravanam and Kirtanam, hearing and speaking. So I would say that when we are here, what we're exposing ourselves to, if we want to make sure that we're utilizing our memory to its optimum, when we are hearing, we should be hearing very attentively and very regularly. Okay, because then if we hear attentively and regularly, the mind always has something Krishna conscious to recall and nourish the intelligence with, because then the intelligence feeds off this when we make decisions. What is the main function for us to recall anything? So we can make use of it, right? The intelligence is reliant, like we were speaking about this earlier, that the intelligence is reliant on memory, because if we can't remember anything, we cannot discern. We've got nothing to make it. We can't make any comparison or contrast, right? So when it comes to making life decisions, when it comes to making decisions about, even just, people have so many problems making decisions, and often people have struggle to make decisions where they don't have enough information or recollection about what they're trying to make a decision about. Once we have that, then it's much easier. So by regularly and attentively hearing, we ensure that our intelligence has so much to feed off when making decisions, and that those decisions are based on the spiritual paradigm, on an absolute truth, rather than a relative truth only. Because if we're only basing things on relative truths, then the goalposts are always changing. So which means our choices will constantly have to change to keep up, and it's frustrating and it's distressing. But when the intelligence is feeding off what we are recalling from what we've attentively heard about the absolute truth applies in all relative circumstances. So it makes decision making much, much easier. It means that we are then better able to engage with Guru and better able to apply things according to time, place, and circumstance. So why attentive and regular? You know, this culture we've got of hearing digitally, it's got wonderful pros. It means you can be anywhere in the world and hear from anyone you want. But the cons are that we've unfortunately also got into a culture of passive hearing, doing something else while we're hearing, being half present when we're hearing. So many people will join Zoom calls and they won't put their video on. Hands down, every time I'm speaking, whether it's a sangha or a class, whatever it is, the devotees who are on with their video on, they engage far more than the devotees who are off camera.
Yep.
Okay, because if the other person can't see you, you also are less present. So this attentive and regular, even if you're in a situation where it's very hard for you to get to the temple or it's very far away, when you do have dedicated time to hearing, respect yourself, respect the content, respect the time of the person and energy of the person speaking, and treat it as if you were face to face. Sit with a notepad. If you were in the temple, you wouldn't wash the dishes while you're listening to the Bhagavatam class speaker. I mean, unless, you know, yes, of course, in temple scenarios, if your fixed service is something in particular and it happens during class time, then they have speakers and they have arrangements like that. But I'm saying, don't make it a habit of, oh, I'll squeeze my hearing in when I'm doing something else. And I want to come back to this attentive and regular. It's got to be regular. We were talking about impressions being regular. The more, it's like repeatedly carving in the same place. Okay, a groove will form. You look at vinyl records, it's all based on grooves. Okay. And so grooves and ridges. And so the mind is also like that. You know, the more repeatedly you do something, it's like it sculpts the mind, it molds the mind. This is how a sculptor works. They repeatedly make a particular movement and it shapes the material that they're working with. So do justice to your hearing so that your memory is being utilized to recall those things that can really nourish your intelligence.
Yeah, so important. And I really like the point about, being attentive and being regular, because repetition is the mother of learning. You know, a lot of verses I've learned is because I listened to Prabhupada's classes. I'll listen to the same class by Prabhupada several times. And then it's like every time I'm hearing that verse, I literally learn it from him, and even in his classes, he repeats the same verses often over and over again. So be around people that do that. And I think practice was a really nice, another point. I think practice and patience and perseverance go along with that, because I find, like, you're not going to get it immediately sometimes. I think not giving up as well, and being persistent. So thank you, for those practical tips. And I loved the one about being present on Zoom, because, we all feel, and I think we all feel this, that imagine if you were talking to someone and you're like looking away. Like, what if we were doing this interview right now and I was like looking over here doing something, like, being present with full undivided attention, that is also an expression of respect, of care, of love, and about the attentiveness. I think Srila Prabhupada said that as a definition of love, that he said love means attention to detail. And so we think these small things don't matter, but actually they do. And so thank you for giving us a very practical way that we can increase our memory by being present fully, undivided attention. I really liked that.
And actually, if we come back to the point we were making earlier on about how actually our spiritual memory and our pure devotional memory is eternal and perfect, the more we practice Krishna consciousness, actually people find that their memory starts to improve, even their functional memory in this world, because the mind is less weighed down by other things. Yeah.
And the mood you said to listen is really important as well. Like, even Krishna says in that verse, Shrinvatam Swakata Krishna Punya Shravanatanam. It says, the devotees who've developed an urgency to hear my message, not that I'm just there in the class and washing the dishes like you said, but an urgency. So question 4.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare